Hey everyone, and welcome to Ultimate Music Teachers Live. I'm your host, Glory St. Germain, with Joanne Barker from Ultimate Music Theory. And today we're talking about 3 tips to teach music theory to those little beginners. How are you feeling about that, Joanne?
Well, I love beginners. That happens to be what I base my studio on, is the young ones. So I'm a big fan of teaching beginners.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is that sometimes when we think about teaching beginners, we only think about those little tiny munchkins. But we can also have beginners that are 10-year-olds, that are 14-year-olds. And in fact, we can be teaching adult beginners too. So let's dive into our 3 tips today to teach music theory beginners. So, one of the most important things, and I'm sure we all agree as music teachers, and go ahead and share in the chat with us, what your thoughts are and how old do you start your beginners? Do you take adult beginners? Do you take teens? Do you take little ones? What do you like to start with your music students teaching? So, the first one we're talking about today, Joanne, is our knowledge base. So, when you think about starting to teach beginners, the most important thing is finding out what they know already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where are we going to take them? And one of the things that we often talk about is how can you do an assessment of what do you know? Because if you just take everyone and they say, I'm a beginner, but they might have had some previous experience. So what do you kind of put into place, Joanne, so that you can say, oh, this is a little assessment test I want to give my students, so that, especially if they're a transfer student from, another teacher.
Well, actually, I had an adult student start with me. It was a Christmas gift her husband gave her for 6 weeks, and she's still going with me now and going to be coming back in the fall. But what I did was I printed off the Prep 1 exam, the sample exam, and then we just sat down and started working through it and went, okay. And she went, I don't know what that is. And then she went, well, I know what this is. So the exams format is a really good way to test to see, like, maybe she knew terms. She happened to be a school teacher. So maybe, she's done some fill-in work in music. So she knew the note values, but she didn't know the note names in the bass as well. So going through the assessment exam, particularly with an older beginner, be it an adult, a 12-year-old, whatever, that gives you an idea of where to start with them. And for the little ones, I've heard it said that some people don't think they're teaching theory. I read somewhere that, well, I teach piano, but I don't teach theory. Yeah. Actually, you know what? We're teaching theory using the piano, because everything that comes out of our mouth is about the theory of music and the piano, whether it's talking about note values or whatever. So it's very important. And these books right behind me are so useful for those little ones, because they're engaging and they're fun to look at and they're meaningful. And that's really important.
Yeah, 100%. And, one of the things I wanted to mention to you, were talking about different levels. So when you are starting your young beginners, because today we're talking about beginners. So when you're starting young beginners, you want to, as Joanne said, start them in the beginner ABC workbook series, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a student who's maybe a little bit older and has had a tiny bit of a beginner start, then you may want to start them into the Prep 1, the green workbook, or Prep 2, right? The purple book. And I would say that's a really good starting point. And the only place to really put a so-called beginner, if they're an advanced student and they've had this mishmash of music theory education through their career as a musician, and they really want to progress quickly, they can start in the complete music theory workbook. And that is a combination of basic, intermediate, and advanced. But it's for the accelerated learner. So even though you're a beginner, it's important that we really first create that level of knowledge base. What do you know? So in fact, what we did is we created the Ultimate Music Theory exams for Prep 1, Prep 2, Basic, Intermediate, and Advanced, and the answer books. And this is all inside the membership. So if you go to teachumt.com, inside the membership, we've created these resources. So when you start your theory club classes, you don't have to, pull out your hair and going, what? Where am I going to start? So the first thing is start your knowledge base. Anything to add, Joanne?
No, you have to know what they know. Some little 6-year-olds already know a bunch of stuff. Yeah. Some little 6-year-olds have been taught the wrong thing by their teacher at school. So we have a little undoing to do. So be aware of that as well, because some teachers don't. Well, I had one calling middle C, C5. It's like, no, that's not middle C. So you have to know what they know, because you might have some damage control to do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Joanne. I remember having one student who came to me and he said, "Oh yes, I can just jump into the intermediate level." And I said, "Oh really? Okay." So I did the assessment with him and I put him into the basic exam assessment, and he just failed miserably. And it was a challenge because I didn't want to embarrass him or his teacher to say, this is not right, but he had not really done any review tests. So he didn't have a solid foundation. And I think that's why, number one, you have to assess the knowledge base. What do you know? Because you want your students to be successful. You want them to say, this is easy. You want them to learn and remember and be excited about learning. So,
and the nice thing, Lori, the Prep 1 book, I'm using it for this adult who's a retired school teacher. It's not a baby looking book. It's not laid out childlike. It's laid out in a sophisticated manner that any age group, like the young kids, when they open it up, they're going, oh, this is really cool. When an adult looks at it, they're going, okay, this is really cool, because it's not got, cute little pictures and diagrams, and it hasn't, I'm not going to say dumbed it down, but it hasn't glossed it up to make it all cutesy pie. Yeah. It's a theory textbook that's practical and well laid out and available and appropriate for any age.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And thank you for saying that, Joanne, because, sometimes I think books can be distracting. And one of the things when I was writing the Ultimate Music Theory series is I did a lot of research for effective learning. And I found that you can actually find workbooks that are detrimental to learning because they're confusing. You don't get it. There's like pages and pages of information. And then now you're asked questions and you can't even remember. So you need to go back. So one of the formats of the Ultimate Music Theory series is examples, exercises, and information on every single page. So you know exactly what you're doing. You're writing on every page. You feel successful. And at the end of every lesson is a comprehensive review test. So what you've learned in lesson 1, review. Lesson 2 is 1 and 2. Lesson 3 is 1, 2, and 3. Just as we're building knowledge in our music, right? We first learn melodies and then we learn harmonies and then we put them together. So yeah, we really want to create that knowledge base so they feel successful. And we're starting that off right with beginners, right? Those little munchkins. Yeah, a lot of fun. So that brings us into number 2. And so we've established their knowledge base. We know where they're ready to go. The next question is their workbook level. So one of the things when I was writing the supplemental series with Sheila McKibben-Uren, she's also the examiner for the Ultimate Music Theory certification course. And she created this wonderful blog that's about which workbook to use. And I'll actually share the link in the chat notes below, because where do you even start? And sometimes that can be so you kind of know this is their knowledge level, but what workbook do you start? So when you are teaching those young little 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, you're not going to start them in Prep 2. And what's your sort of favorite one to go to? I know you've got your beginner ABC books behind you, Joanne.
I love the ABC series. The thing is, it's meaningful. Like I remember when Sheila was writing it, she actually put out questions. What do you want to see in the book? And the one thing that I actually commented on was the hands and the finger numbers, because it seems that this is a problem, especially for older kids. This is my left hand. Is this finger 2 or finger 4? So they talk a lot about patterns in school and not opposites, apparently. So a lot of even older kids were struggling with that. So she's included that, the correlation of the finger numbers, the hand layout. And not a lot of books that I've used in the past have done that. We just, we know what finger 2 is. So we assume our students know what finger 2 is. Yeah. So I really like the pace that it goes at. It's not too fast. It's not too slow. And it makes sense. It's meaningful stuff. We're not learning about mezzo piano when we haven't even learned about where C is on the keyboard. So it's very practical and very logical. And that's a great thing to have in a theory book, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one other thing too that I wanted to mention, Joanne, is that when we're looking at the workbook level, the Ultimate Music Theory workbooks, when you're looking at these, if you are teaching violin or piano or voice or any stringed instrument, whatever instrument you're teaching, woodwind, doesn't matter. You need, as you said earlier, the language of music theory is applicable to all. And the reason that we use the keyboard is a visual representation so that you can literally see the keyboard and understand this is a pattern that's stepping up, or this is an interval of a third, or I'm kind of doing my karate chopping here, or if it's minor, we're going to make it smaller, right? But you need to have that visual representation. So sometimes people say, well, is this just piano based? And the answer is absolutely not. You need, as you said, Joanne, doesn't matter what instrument you're teaching, that's the foundation for all music. So
well, and the thing is, I attended the University of Western Ontario, now called Western University, and you had to have a minimum of grade 6, no matter what instrument or voice you were playing. So if people are, kids are going to go on and want to pursue music as a career, they still need to have an understanding of the piano. So you're really doing them a favor. Let's face it, music is a language, and we know the capacity to learn language does diminish. The experts say at 9, I think it's about 11. If I teach an 11-year-old beginner or a 47-year-old beginner, they learn the same way. I've been doing this for a few decades now, and that's been my experience. So if you wanted to get them a good foundation so that when they do go to university, they are comfortable with the keyboard, this is the time to start it. Get that language in their heads when they're little. So it's a no-brainer. They can go over, if they're a singer, they might want to sit down and play the piano for themselves and accompany themselves instead of hiring an accompanist all the time. So you're doing them a favor by bringing that knowledge to them and expanding their vocabulary in music.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you're a professional, educator, obviously, author, and as well as performer. I mean, you've played in churches, you've accompanied, you've basically done it all. And I think one of the things that when we talk about this, it really is leading us into our tip number 3. So we've got our knowledge base. We know this is what we know. We've now discovered this is the workbook level we're going to go into, but here's kind of the icing on the cake that I have learned. And that's number 3. And that's when we talk about connecting with our student, because we've all found sometimes that it doesn't quite, we have had the student for years and there's just something that doesn't work. And that brings us to our 3rd tip, which is learning style. So many years ago, I would have bet you $1 million that my learning style was kinesthetic. That's what I thought. Mm-hmm. And then as I went through my neurolinguistic programming, I'm an NLP practitioner certified. And I realized that, in order to really engage in and learn best, we all have a specific learning style, whether you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. So what do you consider your learning style, Joanne?
Well, I'm laughing because you see, I used to think that I was very tactile, very kinesthetic. You see, you see that? Yeah. Apparently I'm visual. Who knew? Until I took the Elite Educator Program training and went through the back, I was convinced, because I'm fidgeting, I'm moving all the time. I need to do things, but I also need to see it with my own eyes. We recently had back in February, a performance class at the church where I was going to be holding the recital, because most of my students are little, hadn't done a recital ever. And I said, I wanted them to see what it was like to be up on stage. It's like, not feel, that would be kinesthetic, but that's what comes out of my mouth. So when we start listening to our students and they're just what they're saying, like, well, you should have seen what happened at school, or I heard this at school today, or I felt this at school. We need to listen to their words, because not that we need to teach the way they learn. I teach groups, so I can't teach a concept 6 ways at the same time. However, your materials, the Ultimate Music Theory books, touch on that, right? There's playback exercises you can do, there's sight reading exercises you can do, and there's listening exercises you can do. So, and writing exercises. So it's really important that we're aware of what those learning styles are, because sometimes you get that kid and you're like you said, I just don't know what to do with this child. Well, chances are their learning style is the opposite of yours.
Yeah, and that could very well be. So let's do a quick breakdown. So there's visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So visual learners learn best through charts and graphs, and they like to read. They want to see, right? They're visual. So charts and graphs, and in fact, in the Ultimate Music Theory workbook, you will see where we have square brackets around examples to draw the eye there, and also notes. So that's for the visual learner, right? The auditory learner obviously listens and they hear things. So they learn best through listening and also replying. So sometimes when you're teaching a student, and if you say, can you draw the circle of fifths, for example, on your whiteboard? And your student may say, draw the circle of fifths on my whiteboard. They will repeat what you have said, right? That's sort of an auditory learner. The third one is the kinesthetic learner, and they learn best through engaging in activities. And sometimes a kinesthetic learner will be fidgety, as you said, Joanne. They'll be fidgety on the bench, they'll be fidgety here. But here's what I know to be true. When you teach in all three modalities, which is kind of what Joanne and I are doing right now. So number one, visual, you see us on the screen, right? Auditory, you hear us speaking to each other, right? And kinesthetic, I might be saying, write that down. For those of you taking notes, when we engage in the act of writing, we retain 30 to 40% more information. And that's why we've included inside the Ultimate Music Theory Teachers membership information so that you can teach your students in their own learning style and engage them in the lesson plans. We've also created all of these for you so that you are reaching out to all modalities, regardless of what their learning styles are. Even when you're teaching in group settings, you learn faster when you present in all three ways. So it's kind of a win-win-win, right?
Win-win-win. Definitely. Yes. All three wins.
All three. I have a quick story to share with you, Joanne. One of our Ultimate Music Theory certified teachers called me. She said, Gloria, I have a story to share with you. And I said, oh, I love stories. So she said, well, here's what happened. She said, I had this young student who I've been teaching for several years, and we like each other, but there's just kind of this not working. And she said, so I realized that he always would ask me, could you play that for me? And I would always say, no, read your music. And she said, and upon completing the Ultimate Music Theory certification course and studying about learning styles, I realized that I was not teaching him in his learning style. She said, I'm visual. He's clearly auditory, which I now can identify. So he came into his lesson and she said to him, I'm going to play a piece for you today. And she said, he just kind of lit up. He was so excited. And she said, so I played him the Addams Family, you know, the song, Joanne, ba-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, right? And she said, and then I asked him to switch and I took the music and he played it. And she said, I was so surprised because I was not able to do that. And I put the music in front of him and we had this wonderful music theory lesson about how these concepts and how it all works. And she said, when he skipped out, he kind of said, that's the best piano lesson I ever had. And she said, it warmed my heart to realize that, wow, I'm finally making this breakthrough that it's not this anymore, but I have been open. So as a music educator, I invite you to consider really digging deep into your students' learning styles, because maybe we're not teaching them as they learn best, which is what you said, Joanne.
You know, what just occurred to me there too, Gloria, when you said that, is he was very auditory, and I've heard so many people go, wow, my students their listening skills are so amazing. But that just got him excited to actually read the music so that he's going, okay, this is what I want to play. So maybe I do need, so that's just opening the door to him to the possibility that I need to work on my reading skills because my listening skills. But when they have that self-realization, that's a lot better than us saying you need to read the music.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, 100%, Joanne. And the other thing too is that young children have a predominant learning style. As we get a little older, we can have a secondary learning style, right? But until you actually go through the training and identify your own learning style and then learn how to identify the learning style of your students, that's when the aha little bubble comes on and we can, be more effective educators. So that is our 3 tips for you to start teaching music theory to your beginners, regardless of what age they are, but really go back and say, what's their knowledge base, right? We want to know, figure that out. You can do the tests that are inside the UMT program. Number 2, decide what workbook level would be best for their learning. And number 3, identify their learning style so that you can teach more effectively. And I'm so excited to share all of this with you at teachumt.com. Joanne's created some amazing resources for you. There's lots of games and activities.
And those games can be used as assessment exams too.
Yes, that's really a great idea. Write that down, Joanne.
I will write that down. I've got a whole stack of games behind me here, and I just can't put them, but they can be they're great reviews.
You just had this aha moment with me. And I think that's incredible. What about playing a game and using that for your little beginners as an assessment?
Here's one, Prep 1, Out of This World. It's kind of like a matching game. So you'd find out what do they know by playing a 5-minute game.
Yeah,
right.
That actually is that's a brilliant idea, because sometimes too, when we say tests, we get into that freeze mode. And if we say, oh, let's play a game test, I think we should make a new word, Joanna. It should be called the game test. And the game test.
Leave it with me. I'll come up with a new word.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to have like a something game test, game or something.
We're just going to play a game now. And then when they go, I don't know what that is, then you make a note of what they know, what they don't know. And that helps you decide which book to start in, particularly with the little ones that you're going to put in, you know, the A, B, and C book up behind me here.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So great. So I invite you to leave us a little message in the chat. What tip resonated with you the most? What questions do you have? We're happy to answer them for you. And go to teachumt.com so you can learn more about our Ultimate Music Teachers membership. So till next time, teach with passion. Thanks, Joanne.
Bye-bye.